Good morning, everyone, or evening as the case may be if you are here in Taiwan. Welcome to the first episode of a potentially new series where we are just going to be focusing on games. No themes, no news, just games. So if you like this show, please don't forget to leave us a comment on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. And this episode 1 is recorded on October 9th, 2020. Korean?
Yes, today we'll be talking about games we are playing, games we played before that, maybe you should give a try, and games that are coming in the future that you should be really excited about and keep an eye on. So Adam, what's going on? What have you been playing recently?
I've been playing Genshin Impact. It's a super popular game right now. You've probably heard of it. I think most people at this point have. I think it recently even usurped Fortnite as the #1 streamed game. I haven't been streaming it myself, but I have been playing it for quite a bit. So this was released not too long ago, just September 28th, just last month. So that would be about 2 weeks ago. So far, I'm really enjoying it. People are comparing it a lot to Breath of the Wild. I have not played Breath of the Wild. I do not have a Switch, unfortunately. I had the opportunity to get one, but that's a story for another day. But anyway, people have been comparing it to Breath of the Wild. And I think a lot of that has to do with both the exploration aspect of it and the artistic style of it. So it's one of these very kind of cel-shaded, anime-esque looking games. And it does take a lot of inspiration from Breath of the Wild. You have your climbing with the stamina bar, and you have the glider. So all these things together, at a glance, make it look a lot like Breath of the Wild. But where it does differentiate from Breath of the Wild is that rather than having one character, so in Breath of the Wild, obviously you play as Link. Instead of having the one character, you actually have a cast of characters. And I'm not quite sure how many there are right now. I think I've unlocked around 8 or 9 different characters. And each character has their own set of abilities and things that they can equip. And they have their own elements. So the way that they do elements in this game, I actually really enjoy it. A lot of times when we think of elements, we think of something like Pokemon, where you get this kind of rock, paper, scissors, water beats fire, earth beats water, maybe, I don't know if wind beats earth, whatever beats earth, plants beats earth or whatever. And they do have some enemies in the game that are associated with a certain element that will take extra damage from certain other elements. But for the most part, it's more about their interaction together. So, for example, if you have, say, water, you can get an enemy wet. And if you get multiple enemies wet and then you hit them with lightning, the lightning will actually bounce between all the wet enemies. Also, if you use ice on wet enemies, it will freeze them. If you use ice on a dry enemy, it will chill them. But then if you cast fire on that, then it will cause them to kind of do this melt thing that will cause a little bit of extra damage. So the way that the elements interact with each other are kind of interesting because it doesn't have that traditional rock, paper, scissorsness to it. It's more of about combos. And you don't usually see a lot of elemental systems based on combos like that. So I think it's quite interesting. Another difference from Breath of the Wild is your gear does not break here. Okay, so when you get your gear, you can keep it forever. You don't have to worry about it breaking or anything like that. However, and this has to do with getting your gear and getting your characters, this game is made by a Chinese company, MiHoYo, and it has if you're familiar with Chinese games, it does have a very Chinese feel to that. And to our Western audience, they might not really understand what that means. And what that is I'm going to have to go a little bit into the history of gaming in Asia for a bit here. So it's a little bit of a tangent. But in the West, a lot of us could afford consoles. A lot of us could afford our own PCs. We could have them in our house. Traditionally, in East Asia, like Japan or the Philippines or China, a lot of people didn't have enough money to buy their own consoles or PCs that were capable of playing these games, which is why we saw like the arcade scene in Japan is still going strong today, even though it died back in the 80s effectively in the West. And so what they would do is they had internet cafes where people could go to an internet cafe, pay for time, and then play a game for a certain amount of time while you're paying for that. Well, because of that, people don't buy games. The games would just come installed on these computers. And so the way that these companies would make money is by just doing a lot of little microtransactions, which is basically the kind of system that we see in League of Legends. That's a very Chinese system in that the game is free to play, but if you want some extra skins, if you want some extra stuff, you have to pay for that. And then not only that, but the game, you install the game on your computer, but your account is online. So you can just go to any computer, pull your account down, and it has all your stuff on it. So Genshin Impact is that kind of game. Okay, so it is completely free, but there are going to be quite a few microtransactions and things like that you're going to have to get into, and so you're going to be constantly upgrading your weapons, and because of it, it is going to have a loot box system, which, and if I'm being entirely honest, I'm kind of surprised that nobody's kind of made a fuss about that, because loot boxes, I mean, what was it, last year or the year before, where people were outraged by them. They were so mad. But then, Genshin Impact comes out and everyone's like, oh yeah, this is a great system. It's wonderful. So I don't know if that's because it's a free-to-play game or what. But so far, I'm having a lot of fun with it. We did politics on our Tuesday episode. This is going to come into play because it is a Chinese-made game, so they have said the word Taiwan in the game. You can't use it as your name. Now, I've heard in chat you also can't use words like Xi Jinping or Hong Kong or anything like that. You can nickname yourself Xi Jinping or Hong Kong. I tested it myself. You cannot nickname yourself Taiwan, so I don't know why Taiwan is the only nickname that's banned. But apparently in chat, they have other terms for it too. So there is that. So the people that I would recommend this game for are people who don't have a Switch, but are looking for that Breath of a Wild type game. I mean, sometimes you have that game like Halo on Xbox, and people on PlayStation are like, oh, what should we play? We don't have Halo, so then they tried out Resistance or Killzone. I think this is kind of the same thing where if you don't have a Switch, go ahead and try this, and you're going to get not I guess you'd call it a spiritual successor, where it has some similar things, but it's not entirely the same. So sure, you've probably heard of it. You have any questions for me, or?
Of course. This is always going to have questions. So, I mean, how many hours do you think you've put in so far?
I've actually put in quite a few. The only reason I'm actually playing this is normally I'm the kind of person who starts a game and I want to finish it before I move on to something else. And I was playing Ghost of Tsushima, and I'm nowhere near done with that. The only reason that I am playing Genshin Impact right now is because if I have one weakness, it is timed events and timed unlocks. And so because the game just came out, they basically have this event right now where if you sign into the game, you can get, if you're on PS4, you can get a special glider that will not be available later, or maybe it will be, but you might have to pay for it or something like that. So if you play on PlayStation right now, you can get that glider. And also, if you can get your adventure rank up to level 20, you can unlock a free character who's a healer. And normally you have to hope that you roll her in an RNG when you're unlocking these characters. So getting a healer for free is actually a really, really big deal. So I just wanted to get up to level 20 to get that freebie. And then I'm going to switch back over to Ghost of Tsushima, which will probably work out pretty well anyway, because this is a live game. So they only have the first 2 zones available now, and then later zones will become available later. So,
why I asked about the hours, in the time that you spent, do you feel progression has been consistent? Do you feel it's like you as you're playing, you're gaining levels? There's no point in the game where you're like, okay, I'm level 10 until level 11 took forever, and you feel like frustrated or something like that?
As far as moving up in levels, I haven't had too much trouble. There are some things where your characters have levels, and they're locked up to level 20, and you cannot progress past level 20 unless you get certain items, which you can collect in game. But once you get those items, then you can what's called ascend, and then that will unlock the next tier of levels for those characters. You do have to reach a certain adventurer level, which is kind of your account level or your game level. So you have a game level, then you have character levels. You do have to get your game level, your adventure level up to a certain point before you can unlock certain features. So there are points where you're in the story, going through the story quest, and then you'll hit a point where it's like, okay, well, this story quest is level 12, the next one's level 16, and you just have to kind of go off and do side stuff. So there are parts where you do kind of feel like you're I was on a roll and now I got to stop and do this. But it never felt like it really slowed down because there's always plenty to do. I will say this though, it does reward people who like to go out of their off the beaten path because there's no mount and you do have limited running stamina. So your character will run for a while and then they'll stop, and you have to build up your stamina. And then you can run for a while and they'll stop and they'll run out of stamina. So traversing the map can be quite long. It took. I remember I was at one point. I got a quest and I was looking at the quest marker and it was 3 kilometers away in the game, and it took me quite a while to get there. So if you're the kind of person that likes to go out and adventure, there are nodes that you can unlock for quick travel. So I would go out of my way and unlock those because later on it's going to save you a huge headache than having to run all the way back every time.
That definitely sounds like a good plan. I hate. I played Zelda Breath of the Wild and I liked the game, but the walking between points, even riding a horse, I felt was like kind of slow to go here and go there. It's why I think I spent about 20 hours, and I'm like, I understand why people like the game, but Zelda was just not for me.
Yeah, this one's Zelda's more has a lot more survival elements to it. This doesn't have any survival elements to it. It's
Okay.
just a pure action game. Um, so in some ways it's simplified, but in other ways it's very different. But you
L-
definitely have that spirit.
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Last question. How was the performance on your PS4?
It was fine. I didn't notice any. I haven't noticed any stuttering or frame rate issues or anything like that. I've seen other people reporting that they've had some frame rate drops. I haven't really experienced it. But to be honest, I am not the person to ask that because I don't notice these things when they do happen. I'll play a game at like 20 frames a second, and I'm like, everything's fine. I'm that little dog. Everything's fine. I'm perfectly fine with what's happening right now. So I'm not a stickler for frame rates, but if I've had them, I haven't noticed them.
Okay, no, that's fine. I'm the same way. Is when I play games at like 4K, 30 frames per second, and people are like, "Man, you should be playing this at a high resolution. How can you play this? This is terrible." But for me, it's fine. I'm in. Yeah, no problem.
It's the old man in us. I remember
Indeed.
playing, what was it, GoldenEye back in the day on N64 or like Perfect Dark, and sometimes the frame rates would drop to like 11.
Oh Jesus.
And it seemed normal for us back then. Going back and playing it, I was like, oh my God, how did we ever survive? but
That's
but back then
that's
we were like, this
totally
is great.
true. Yeah, that's totally true.
All right, what about you? What have you been playing?
Okay, let me switch to me, and let's put my game on the screen
I hope
here.
everybody likes our new overlays. I put a lot of work into them.
Yes, yes, you should definitely comment about Adam's overlays. Send us some comments. He'd love to hear them. So, Adam, I have been playing a game called Trine 4 The Nightmare Prince. I played Trine 1 and 2. I skipped Trine 3 for some reason. Trine 4 was released on October 8, 2019, so almost literally a year ago. It's a really beautiful game with some like interesting puzzles, but sometimes they did frustrate me. I've been playing with my friend Hans, and there's this particular sort of like physics-based or light-based puzzle that's been like driving me up the wall. Um, and it reminds me like this game could be an education game where you have to like reflect light from like different angles in order to hit this thing, and if you hit this thing the door will open, and you have to figure out, okay, I have to combine everybody's powers and magic in order to do this. But uh, that is a tangent I will escape from. So Trine is basically, it's a game, 2.5D platformer. Trine 4 is. The original Trines were just 2D platformers. There are puzzles involved. There's sort of minor action now. There used to be more action in the older games, but very basic. Like probably in Trine 4, it's about 30% combat and 70% puzzles and jumping and figuring things out and talking to the friend you're playing with. This game can be played solo though, but it's definitely a game to play with 2 or 3 people. It's maximum 3 people because there are 3 characters: a rogue, a wizard, and a knight. Uh, if you love puzzles, definitely give this a go. I would definitely recommend it as like a real like a party game, something you play with your 3 friends online. Local is cool because this is available on the Switch. This is also Steam Remote Play, which means that you can play this on your computer, and someone else in another part of probably the same country can play this on your computer as well, even if they don't have the game. And that's pretty much it. It's awesome. I enjoying it, not as much as I used to, and I think I would prefer it in a local sense. Like playing it online is cool, but I feel like locally would be much more fun.
So I played Trine 2. I didn't finish it. It was free on PlayStation Plus like way back in the day. Would you say that you should probably play the previous ones to get the story, or is the story completely standalone? Or
The story does continue, but in a very basic way. So, like, when I started this game, it referenced Trine 3 story, which I didn't play, but I got the idea of what happened in Trine 3. And it's really not important. You don't need to. I know you're a big story person, so for me, even this in Trine 4, there's a story. It's about the prince of the realm that you belong to, and he has some sort of dormant magic powers, and he runs away. And when he runs away, his magic powers are unleashed, and nightmares come into the realm, and uh, that's pretty much it. But it's a story is not a big part of the game in Trine 4 anyway, I would say. I felt like Trine 1 story was like a really big part of the game. Trine 4, definitely a big focus on the sort of increasing complexity in the puzzles and the 2.5D nature of the game. Yeah.
what about difficulty? So, like, normally a game's difficulty, you can just say, "Oh, make it easy" or "make it harder." But I mean, obviously, with puzzle games, you can't really make a puzzle easier or harder. How hard would you say it is?
I would
Is this
say
something anybody could get into, or
I would say there's something anybody could get into. You know, the wonders of 21st century is you can just Google problems, which me and Hans did once or twice, just because there were just certain puzzles. Adam knows I have a limited time to game, and we're getting towards the end of the time. I'm like, oh man, we've got to finish this, and if we don't finish this, we're gonna have to redo it all over again next week. So we did have to Google stuff. But there is like a lot of ways to do things. I know sometimes in puzzle games they get a bad rep that there's only one way, but in Trine 4, because everybody has such different powers and there's different ways to combine them, you can achieve solutions to puzzles in different ways.
so is this just like a straight up platformer, or is this more like a Metroidvania kind of thing where you can kind of go back and unlock new stuff as you go?
Straight up platformer. There's definitely no unlocking. I mean, when I played on Wednesday this week with Hans, I think we must have clocked in about 9 hours so far in the game, and apparently, you know, because you can look up how many hours it takes to finish a game. To finish the game, only takes 12 hours.
Oh, okay,
So
that's short.
it is a short game. Um, Definitely something for people, and the price is not expensive. I mean, I bought it for less than $20 on Steam,
Okay,
and
so given that it's a short game, would I mean, but it's still $20, less than $20. Would you say this is a buy, or is this a wait for a sale kind of thing?
I would say if you've got a situation to play it in, this is definitely not a solo buy. If you're looking for a puzzle game, definitely get it on sale. If you've got some friends coming over, or you want to play something online with somebody, uh, yeah, give it a buy. Why not?
All right, that covers my
Cool.
questions.
Thanks for the questions, Adam. And we're moving on to your old game.
Ah, yes, my old game. So I played way back. I guess it must have been 2 years ago. Uh, Dragon's Dogma. So originally, Dragon's Dogma came out in 2012 on the Xbox and PS3, but then it came out later with an expansion, Dark Arisen, and then for the PS4 they had the remastered version, and I'm pretty sure it's on the Xbox One as well. The remastered version, Dragon's Dogma, Dark Arisen. So this is basically all the content that you had from the original game. There weren't too many DLCs. I think it was just the one major DLC and a few small ones that were just kind of like, what do you call them, outfit packs or whatever. But so yeah, it all re-released in 2017. So it's made by Capcom, and that's significant because that's also the company that makes Devil May Cry and Monster Hunter. And if you've played those kinds of games, then you basically already know what kind of combat you're going to be getting into. So the combat in Dragon's Dogma is pretty much the only reason you should be playing it. The story is extremely bare bones. If you've seen speedrunners, they can play the entire game in less than 20 minutes. So it's not long. The side quests are usually kind of on the just really, really bare bones. So the combat is really where this game stands out. And it's one of those games where I just sometimes feel like I just want to go back and play this game again. And I don't care about the story. I just want to go back and fight it. So the way it works is if you've played Shadow of the Colossus, you kind of have an idea of what's going to happen. Now, for smaller enemies, it's just your traditional kind of fighting game. But for bigger enemies, you can scale them. So if you have an ogre, you can climb on it and get on its head and start stabbing it in the head, or get on its back and start kind of, chipping away at it, or go for the eyes. And it works out really, really well. You can knock parts of them off like Monster Hunter, knock off a tooth here or something like that and use it as items. And so that's what makes the game just really, really fun, is just all this kind of combined together. Different classes, and you kind of combine these classes and whatnot, so you can get some abilities from one or whatever. You also, I'm getting all muddled here. So one of the other great systems about this game is that it has what's called a pawn system. And what that is when you create your character, your Arisen, you can also create what's called a pawn, which is an AI-controlled ally. And your pawn has access to all the basic classes. Your Arisen can get the basic classes, but they can also unlock hybrid classes, which will combine two. So, like, for instance, you can have a ranger and a fighter. Combine those, you get the assassin. Pawns do not have access to those hybrid classes. But anyway, the pawns, you can customize their personalities, and they will fight based on the way that you customize it. So you can tell your pawn, I want you to stay back, and I want you to focus on healing. Or you can tell your pawn, I want you to scale the enemies, climb up on them. Or I want you to keep the enemy on the ground, keep them down so that I can scale them and stuff like that. So there is some customization there. And even though the game is not online, if you have online, your pawn can go online, and other players can hire your pawn and use them in their game. So you have a total of 3 pawns at any given time. One of them's your own, and the other 2 you hire from online. So if you have a friend, you can hire their pawn and use their pawn. And then if you get some really good items or something like that, you can gift it to the pawn. And when they return to your friend, you can share items that way. So it's a cool little feature that they have there. I would highly recommend this game for people that enjoy games kind of like Phantasy Star Online, because it is kind of a hack and slash like that. And similar to Phantasy Star Online, you do have certain abilities attached to the buttons that you can use based on your class. So, for example, if you're a ranger, you could do an explosive shot, or you could do kind of a hail of arrows kind of thing. So there is a little bit of customization in that sense. And then also what's really cool is the way you build your character is actually very, very important. So your character has weight and height. A taller character can reach higher things. So, for example, if you're in a dungeon and there's a ledge above you, if you're taller, you can jump and reach that ledge and climb up. A shorter character can't do that. However, a shorter character, if there's like a small little hole for goblins or something like that, you can go chasing them down in those holes, whereas a taller character won't be able to fit. Likewise, lighter characters have less stamina, but it recharges faster, whereas heavier characters have more stamina, but it recharges much more slowly. So actually, this is one of the few games where the physical build of your character actually impacts gameplay, as opposed to something like, say, Skyrim, where it's purely an aesthetics thing. So yeah, I really recommend this game for people that like those kind of hack and slash games. Also for min maxers, people that really enjoy kind of getting into the math of their character, because not only that, the physical aspect, but also depending on which classes you are and when you are those classes. Every time you level up, you'll get a certain stat bonus based on the class that you currently are. So you'll see a lot of guides online that say, oh, be a sorcerer for levels 1 through 20 and then switch to this for the next 30 levels. And then, so for min max people that love math, it's also a great game for those people as well. So yeah, highly recommended.
Cool. I don't know if I told you this, but I've got bought it for the Switch. I did tell you that. I actually played it for about 10, 15 minutes. One of these Sundays when I got back from cycling, and the combat was cool, but I guess it was only 15 minutes. I didn't find anything to sort of grab me in that period of time. Um, I know some of the things you talked about, right? Like the pawns. I did hear about that listening to another podcast. I did have a question about how good is their AI? Like, is this one of those situations like Lydia in Skyrim when she gets herself killed all the time? Or do these pawns actually have survivability?
Uh, I never had too much trouble with pawns in terms of survivability. They are relatively smart, but it does depend on how you kind of train them. So you can sit a pawn down in a chair, and basically it'll do an interview with your pawn where they ask you questions and you respond to them. And they'll say things like, "Oh, do you want me to?" Let's say something like, "Let's say a harpy flies up. Should I run in after it, or should I stay back and take pot shots?" And so you can, by sitting them down in these chairs multiple times, you can actually kind of guide what you want them to do. So if you've trained it relatively well, it should function relatively well within its class. So for instance, if you have a wizard pawn and you're telling them, stay back, do focus on healing, focus on support magic, he's going to do that. And so it's going to work out pretty well. However, if say you have somebody who was previously using their pawn as say a ranger with daggers, and they were up in their face, and then they switched that pawn over to a wizard to give them some magic stats as well, but didn't take the time to sit them down and re-explain strategy, that pawn's going to continue to run up and then just slam something in the face, even though it's a wizard. So it really depends on how much time you're putting into kind of training them and whatnot. But what is also really cool is they remember quests. So if you do a quest, your pawn will remember it. And if somebody else is using your pawn and has that quest, your pawn will give them advice on that quest as to what they should do. Like, oh, I think I remember somebody in this town mentioning something about that. So they will give you advice. And what's also cool is if somebody else is borrowing your pawn and they do a quest you haven't done, when your pawn comes back, they also have information on that quest, so they can help you out as well if they've already previously helped somebody else out. So that is a cool little feature there.
That's really cool. For Dragon's Dogma, do you have a recommendation for how to start the game, like for new players like me who are getting to Dragon's Dogma? Any tips or tricks or things you would suggest for new players who maybe Switch players or PC players? Anything you could suggest from memory?
One unfortunate thing is that if you're not on PC, there's only one save file. Even if you're on PC, there's only one save file, but you could copy that and paste it into another folder. If you're on Switch or PlayStation, you only get the one save, so you can't really experiment with builds, unfortunately.
Oh no.
So, yeah, which is really unfortunate. So, without deleting your character entirely. So I would recommend kind of having an idea of what you want your character to do early on and kind of gear for that. It is pretty self-explanatory which classes are going to give you which stats. For example, if you go with the ranger classes, it's going to primarily be boosting your stamina, but also a little bit your strength. If you're a fighter class, it's going to be strength and a little bit of stamina. If you're a magic class, it's going to be magic and a little bit of stamina. So what I would recommend is if you want to try a different class, try it, but watch your level very, very closely, because when your level gets close, switch to whatever class you want to get the stats buffs in those. So I would highly recommend that. Also, duping is very important in the game, and I don't mean like the cheating duping. There's actually a character who's a forgery guy, and he can make forgeries of certain items, especially quite often quest items. So I would highly recommend you making use of him, because there are times where, say, somebody will say, I want you to pick up this magic ring for me. You can grab the magic ring, dupe it, and then give them the dupe and keep the original one. So definitely do that for quest items if you want to keep some really good items in the game.
That's so
Um,
cool.
yeah. Yeah, you can cheat people. It's pretty great.
But I mean, does the duping, like, is there like a reputation system? Like they're like, hey, you cheating son of a blah blah blah.
No, no, no. He's just a forgery guy. It's just this. He owns like a black market stall in the city, and you just walk up to him, and he can sell you some kind of unique items. But yeah, you can just. One of the things is he can say, if you want me to make a duplicate of something, just let me know. And
Oh, okay.
usually it's for things like, oh, I need a harpy's feather for, or I need 3 harpy feathers for this upgrade. Here is a harpy feather. Make a duplicate of a harpy feather. So most of the stuff is legit, but you can also use it for quest specific items a lot of the time. So
Nice. Last
I
question.
would also highly recommend never buying things. You're gonna find stuff in the wild.
Okay.
So yeah, you don't use your money on buying stuff.
That's
And sleep often, because that's when
okay.
your pawn comes back. When you sleep, that's when it loads your data from your pawn visiting other people. So sleep quite often if you can help
Okay.
it.
The never buying stuff is really pertinent for me because I'm super impatient sometimes in games, and I usually spend my money to buy some kind of sword or bow or whatever it is.
Yeah, most of the stuff you're going to be able to find around the map. Also, what's pretty cool is if you slay a dragon, there's a chance that you can get something, that your item can become what's called, I think they call it Dragon Forged or whatever, which can upgrade it beyond a maximum upgrade. So normally you can upgrade an item to level 3, and then it can be Dragon Forged, which is equivalent to a level 4. Anything can become Dragon Forged when you slay a dragon, but depending on its level, if it's level 3, it's more likely to become Dragon Forged. So slay every dragon you can.
uh, my last question was, I know this game has a lot of cool mechanics. If there's one mechanic you'd
Yes.
like to take from this game and put it in another game, what would you choose and why?
The climbing mechanic. I love the climbing mechanic on big things. I mean, when you're fighting a griffin and it comes down on the ground, and you jump on it and it goes flying up in the air. I mean, that's just, it just feels badass, and it's just amazing. So I would definitely add the climbing mechanic to stuff. And also it's really cool because, like, for instance, if you're fighting, say, a chimera, it has a dragon's head, it's got a goat's head on its back, and it's got a snake head for a tail. Being able to climb on it means you can kind of pinpoint certain weaknesses, so you could like focus on just the goat's head or something like that. So I think I really like that mechanic. Um, if you've ever played Dragon Age Origins, you ever play that?
Yes, I have.
Okay, there's a scene right at the beginning where the Grey Warden attacks this really big ogre thing, and he just takes his daggers out and just stabs it in the chest and just goes climbing up of it,
Oh yes,
and then like
yes.
goes at it and stabs it in the eye. And it's just such a cool scene. And you're like, oh, I wish I could do that in the game. In this game, you actually legitimately can.
Nice.
So I really wish they would add that to more games, especially because you do have big enemies like dragons, and there's just something very cinematic and dramatic about being able to climb on this giant beast and stab it in the neck or whatever. So
Oh yeah,
that would be my choice.
I watched. I mean, I was watching the trailer that we included, with today's show, and I watched the guy jump from the ground and grab onto the griffin's legs. I'm like, oh, that's cool. I didn't notice that.
Yeah, no, that's entirely a gameplay thing. If I had to choose a second thing, it would be the your body type matters.
Your
Uh,
body type matters.
no, it does. So yeah, heavier characters are stronger. They can carry more weight and they have more stamina, but it recharges slower. Smaller characters, they tire out, but they recharge their stamina really, really fast, and they're better at climbing. So they lose less stamina when they're climbing. So smaller characters are good for scaling dragons and whatnot. I really like that. I think that's really cool, and I really wish they did more with it. So you could tweak your character quite a bit more.
Okay. Cool, cool. All right, I'm gonna move on to my old game.
Go ahead.
Okay, let's go to.
One you've mentioned before.
Yes, I have mentioned it before. All right, here is my old game. As you can see by the trailer, developed by Concerned Ape. This is a game I've talked about before. Stardew Valley. It's a farming game, sort of, with a little bit of light RPG elements. It came out. When did it come out? I mean, I should be looking at the show notes for that.
4 years ago.
On October 2016. I mentioned.
That's almost exactly 4 years ago.
Oh, exactly. Yes, as well. Oh, lots of October games. This was developed by one guy. He has a really famous story. I always tell it to my computer class or computer science kids. I said, like, this guy was 22 or 23. He was working McDonald's, and he made Stardew Valley in his part-time. The assets, the sound, the programming. He did it all by himself. And he was eventually helped by Chucklefish Studios with the networking code. So, because now in Stardew Valley you can play co-op, but going back to the game, you can sort of see it in the trailer window. You can fish, you can farm, you can buy and sell things, you can get married. Very relaxing. I've got this game on 3 platforms. I've got it on my iPad, I've got it on the Switch, I've got it on my computer as well. I mean, between all the devices, I've spent more than 100 hours. And it's just one of those like busy work games, and people always confuse why would you play a game where you work and there's not much gaming to it, but it's just fun. It's very relaxing. It is not the first game to do this kind of thing. Adam mentioned a game to me before which I never heard of, which was Harvest Moon, I guess is the game.
You've never heard of Harvest Moon?
I'd never
That dates
heard
back
of
to, I think, like the Super Nintendo or something like that.
I'd never heard of Harvest Moon before.
Oh, wow.
And when I started playing this game, people talked about Harvest Moon, and I was like, oh, okay, now I know where this comes from.
Okay.
Yeah, and so Stardew Valley, really cool. It's definitely for someone if you're looking for something relaxing to play. Not a lot of story in the game, and it's very open. I mean, I did have to Google stuff as well because there are some things like how do you get married and how do you grow this kind of stuff. There's some stuff it's like really not very clear how to do that thing. Like there's loads of different things to do in the game. There's tons and tons of gameplay. I've known people who've played this game for a good 500 hours and they're still finding out new things about it. The guy who made the game, Concerned Ape, which is his Twitter tag, he's still updating the game. There's apparently a big new update coming towards the end of this year to add more content. I've been meaning to get back to this game, but just so much other stuff to play. One of those games is Dragon's Dogma. After Adam talked about it right now, I'm like thinking after we do the show tonight, I'm going to play a little bit of Dragon's Dogma before I go to bed. But yeah.
Do it.
I'm going to. That is Stardew Valley. Really cheap. I think it's $10, less than $10 US. Available on almost every single platform on Android as well as iOS. Definitely buy it. Worth the money for sure. Continuously updated. I've always wanted to do co-op where you can sort of build a farm with somebody else. I'd highly recommend it. Probably one of my top 10 games of my entire lifetime, 38 years of life. It's the game that got me into farming sims or simulators or working games, whatever you want to call it. Definitely a cool game. Any thoughts, Adam?
I had no idea that this was co-op. Is it crossplay?
That part I'm pretty sure it's not. I'd have to check that. But yeah, it is co-op as of, I think we're on 1.6 now. As of 1.3, it's co-op, and when it became co-op, loads of people would stream it, of course, and I'd be able to play it with somebody. People would play it with their wives. Might be a suggestion for you and the wife. Give it a go.
She's not a gamer. She told me she was, but when we were dating, but that turned out to be a lie.
I understand that the girlfriend used to play games as well, and I think she stopped like
Huh?
4 years ago.
I did. The lady didn't show up. Sorry about that. Speaking of my wife, she just walked in. Anyway,
All right.
yeah. So, I had another question. Uh, so as far as this, I've heard some people talking about like there are some parts that are kind of difficult just because like the timing of it, in the sense that it does have like a year cycle, correct?
Yes, farming is a difficult part. For me, the most difficult part was the actual like mining for raw materials because there's like a mini dungeon in the game where you have to go down and every 5 levels it will save your progress. But as you go down, it goes down to like 100 levels. It could be more. But every level you go down, the monsters get harder, the fighting gets harder, and I mean, it's not complicated for fighting. It's just you swing a blade or a sword or whatever your weapon is in a 180-degree angle, and you fight stuff. And as it gets further down, one of the complications is it's dark, so you have to place torches and fight at the same time. And as you get further down, you have these like bats that come at you and fight with you all the time while you're fighting other stuff, and for me that was just crazy hard. Going back to the farming itself is hard because you have to worry about seasons and how long crops take to grow, and some stuff only grows in summer, some stuff only grows in spring, so you have to plant for different seasons, and you have there's just so many mechanics, and it sounds confusing, but it actually isn't, but it does take time to sort of figure out if you're not Googling everything.
Okay, interesting. So is there a bit of a Minecraft aspect to this? You talking about some of that in there, or
Yeah,
is it all like pre-rendered? Or
Um, you can't sort of like change terrain in the way that Minecraft does, but you do build a house, and you do have maintain a farm. You do cut down stuff. Uh, you do fight stuff. I mean, it's kind of Minecraftish. You do a lot of crafting. There's tons of stuff to craft, uh, but not. I would definitely say there's not as much freedom as Minecraft has. And there are Stardew Valley mods, the sort of graphical mods, but there's nothing that sort of changes the gameplay drastically. Stardew Valley cannot become Stardew Shooter or Stardew Zombies Attack or anything like that. Uh, Not at the moment, anyway. But I mean, it's a very vibrant game.
That's amazing. I can like, obviously I do a little bit of art, and I do have a degree in computer science, so I get the programming thing. But doing everything, I mean, I've always thought like if I ever made a game, I could do everything but the music. So to see that this guy did everything is just kind of insane to me.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's like listening, and the music is really quite nice. Uh, Doing it all himself, but it just shows that, I mean, if you've got the willpower to, younger people watching the video or watching our stream, if you want to make a game, there's no time like the present. Just do it, get it done.
Especially because now we have more time than ever.
Indeed, indeed, indeed.
Ah, sounds good.
So what are you looking forward to, Adam?
I am looking forward to Nier Automata. Sorry, not Nier Automata. Nier Replicant 1.22. It's got a long name. I can't tell you it off the top of my head. So this is actually a remake of the original Nier game. So a little bit of background here. The original Nier came out on, I believe, Xbox, and then I might have come back out on PS3 later. But it's a continuation of the Drakengard series. So they have the original Drakengard 1, and then at the end of Drakengard 1, basically they open up a portal into our world, and their world spills into ours. And that's where the original Nier game comes from. And then, of course, Nier Automata is thousands of years in the future after the original Nier game. But what's interesting is when they released it in the West, they released what was called Nier Gestalt, and in Japan, they had what was called Nier Replicant. And the games were identical in every single way, with the exception of the protagonist. In Nier Gestalt, you played as a father looking for his daughter. And in Japan, you played as a brother looking for his sister. But everything else in the game was exactly the same. And the reason for that was apparently the Japanese developers felt that, oh, well, Westerners always want this big, strong, brawny man hero, Rambo type. So, they made a very adult, very buff, very kind of beefcakey guy and made him a father. Whereas in Japan, they were like, oh, we like kind of the lithe, uh, athletic, thin kind of character. So they made him a younger boy. So yeah, it was purely a design choice in terms of character. I think the only other difference there too is at one point in the beginning it references like, oh, it's the year blah 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 blah, and one of them in the Japanese version it's like 100 years after the original game. Um, but anyway, I played Nier Automata and absolutely loved it. I had not previously played a Nier game. I had not previously played a Dragon Guard game. I had wanted to, but they did not release an English version here in Taiwan. And this was back on the PS3 where they did not have a digital version on the store. So it was physical or bust. So I didn't get a chance to play it back then. But then when Nier Automata came out, I played it and I had a lot of fun. And it's really great because it blends so many genres so well. It does, it's like I've said it before. It's twin stick shooter, platformer, action RPG, all that. And now what is kind of interesting, the reason that this is called Nier Replicant 1.2 whatever is because they're actually adding some gameplay aspects of Nier Automata into this game. So it's still the original game, but they've expanded it a bit. So they've added a few more side quests and that sort of thing. But they've also upgraded the combat to make it a little more in-depth. So they're using kind of more of a Nier Automata style in that sense. So I'm really looking forward to this because it is made by the same people. It's got the same kind of aesthetic. It's got a similar gameplay. But also just because there are a lot of times in Nier Automata where they make you can tell that it's a reference to something else, but you just don't know what that reference is. So I'm really looking forward to kind of going through and seeing some of these things and getting a better kind of grasp of the whole universe as a whole. And then hopefully maybe I'll even go back and play Nier Automata again and see if I can pick up some stuff that I hadn't picked up the first time with this new knowledge. So this will be coming out on April 22nd, 2021. So it should be on next-gen consoles. I think it's coming to current-gen consoles as well. I'll have to double-check on that. But if you're a fan of Nier Automata or you're a fan of action RPGs in general, this is probably something you should be keeping your eye on.
Okay. I did notice on the trailer that you sent me and I put next to your video is it says PS4, Xbox One, Steam. Does this mean this is not coming out to the next-gen consoles?
Well, I mean, most next-gen consoles are, what do you call it, backwards compatible anyway. So it will be definitely backwards compatible. Xbox, I think, is making everything backwards compatible. PlayStation basically made an announcement a while back saying any future PS4 games have to be backwards compatible. So it will definitely be available on the new consoles, and it will definitely make good use of the new consoles in terms of faster load times and whatnot. I'm not sure if it's going to get a graphical update because it looks like a lot of games will be getting those. I would not be surprised if it did, but yeah, you can definitely take advantage of higher frame rates and faster load times and that sort of thing.
Okay. So looking at this game and what you've told me of Nier Automata, I'm still looking to buy Nier Automata and play it as well. What is the one aspect of this game are you looking forward to? Is it the story? Is it the gameplay mechanics, modern gameplay in an older game? Or what's the thing that's drawing you in?
So you know that I'm a story guy, but if I'm being entirely honest, it's going to be the gameplay mechanics just because Nier is very convoluted. So the story is very complex. I really enjoy it, but it's one of those things where I remember playing it and I'm like having so much fun, and now I just kind of remember the basic beats and I'm I can't remember most of the little details because it is just all over the place. And it is one of those things where you basically have to have a notepad and be writing down like, oh, this and oh, that.
Oh,
So
okay.
as far as story goes, I am excited because I have when I was playing Nier Automata, not having played the previous game, I did want to go and kind of get a background. So I did watch YouTube videos that kind of rehash the story and some of that. So I'm have a general idea of what's going to be happening in the story anyway. I am interested in seeing some of the new side quest material. Also, this is an older game, which typically they do have complex stories, but uh, we've really seen some really good story driven games this gen. So I'm really mostly just looking forward to the gameplay of it because that it was a lot of fun on Nier Automata.
Um, is there anything from Nier Automata that you hope they will improve in Nier Replicant?
Improvements. That's a very good question. Um, yeah, I don't really know. I know there's obviously going to have to be some changes. For example, one of the things that in Nier Automata for customization is since your character is an android, you can change the chipset that they have. So you can add like basically combat chips or defensive chips and things like that. And that's kind of how you can customize your character. Obviously, your character in this one is a flesh and blood person, so they are not going to be able to use that system. So I am kind of curious to see what they do there. As far as improvements, uh, maybe if they could add some controller customization options because Nier Automata did not have controller customization, and I did eventually get used to the controls, but it did take some getting used to at first because they did have dodge on R2, and they had the pod, which was your ranged attack on R1. So you're dodging with R2 and you're attacking with R1, but then your physical attacks are with square. So if they could kind of add some controller customization support, I think that'd be really great. I really think every game should have that, to be honest.
Okay.
Genshin Impact has a horrible setup where if you've played any other game, no matter what game it is, Genshin Impact is not going to be intuitive because they just do it completely differently than anybody else. And so because of that, it is not intuitive at all. I really wish they would add controller support for that. Um, but yeah, other than that, I can't really think of anything.
Okay, now I definitely agree with you. Custom controls, I mean, in any console, any PC games as well, have to be a must because everybody plays differently. Some people like things in different places. When I've played things on PC and you can't change them and you have to press like Y to do something weird, it's just irritating when the WSAD is where your hands are supposed to be.
Yeah, it's a weird system. So, but it in Nier Automata's defense, I did get used to it. It's one of those things where I don't. Most people that I know, when they hold a controller, they have their index finger on the top buttons, and they use it for both the trigger and the bumpers, or for R1 and R2, or L1 and L2, and they just kind of switch between them. With Nier Automata, you really had to have two fingers up on the two bumpers, and because of that, you would have to hold the controller at a different angle, basically, than you normally would. So it did make hitting the buttons a little bit awkward because you did kind of have to rotate your hand slightly on the controller. Um, I've only ever known one controller that fixed that issue for me, and that was the Pelican Afterglow on the PS2, and nobody has ever used the form factor of that. Look it up. The trigger buttons are underneath the controller, but that was a beautiful thing. But but yeah, it did take some getting used to. But then once you were used to it, it actually worked out really, really well.
Okay. I'm going to look that up
But
after the show.
But that's the thing is you have to get used to it. Yeah, that's a beautiful. I have one. I can go get it for you next time. Show it to you guys.
That might be something, a topic for another show.
Favorite
Controllers.
peripherals.
Oh, yeah. All right. Moving right along to the last game of tonight. My future game is Subnautica Cold North. It is was supposed to be coming out at the end of this year, but of course, COVID-19, uh, everybody's working from home. So this is the stand-alone expansion to the original Subnautica, so you do not need to buy Subnautica to play this. I've talked about it on the Hidden Gem show, so if you want to go back and watch that episode. Um, Subnautica is a survival game set in the ocean where you are some sort of spacefarer. You crash land on a planet, and you have to survive. You have to catch fish and build stuff and mine things and deal with a somewhat hostile environment at your own pace, though. Subnautica Cold North is just a further expansion of the game where you're in a completely new biome. Of course, a much colder biome, and in the original Subnautica, cold is an issue, but not a big issue. But I guess with this issue, in this part on this expansion, cold is going to be a problem. There's going to be new creatures, new things to craft, new things to explore. And there was a storyline in the original Subnautica. I'm sure this one has a storyline as well. Because you're in this planet and there are like alien structures and things that you sort of have to figure out. Like, why am I here? What are these things that I can see? In Subnautica, the original Subnautica, you had these sort of like alien buildings, and you have to go in there, and it helps you figure out how to get off the planet. I wonder if they're going to do this for this game. Cold North is out in early access. You can actually play it now. I looked it up on Steam before we did this show, and the developer said pretty much the storyline or the content of the game is done. And now they're just dealing with patches and glitches and bugs. And it is coming out, I believe, next year, April 22nd, 2021. Oh, no, that is Adam's game. January. It's supposed to be coming out January 2021. That's why you should always make sure your page notes follow the right place.
That's
yeah.
why I use the coding.
Good job. Yes, so that is Subnautica Cold North. Really exciting. Subnautica was very much like Stardew Valley, which I talked about earlier in this episode. A game that sort of introduced me to a genre, and I was kind of not into it in the beginning, but when I started playing the game, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm hooked. I want to play this all day, every day, even though, at our age, we got to work, we got other responsibilities. Definitely something for someone who likes the ocean. I've said this before, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. If you love the ocean, if you love survival games, if you want to play something relatively easy but also has some difficulty, definitely pick it up now if you're an early access gamer, or just wait maybe 4 months and it'll be out next year. What do you think, Adam?
So looking at the trailer here, it looks like you can actually go on land. Is that a new thing?
That would not exactly a new thing. In the original Subnautica, there are patches of land where you can go on, but they're very small. I mean, like you said, looking at the trailer, if there is substantive land, that would be like a really big thing, because the original game, land was a minor element in gameplay. Most of the time, if not 90%, 80% of the game was under the water.
Okay, because here it looks like they're riding some sort of bike, like space thing.
Yeah, that's new. In Subnautica, you do have vehicles. You can actually build yourself this like really cool sub that has things inside. You can have like a little underwater mech thing, which is kind of cool as well. Hopefully, this turns out to be the real thing. I don't have time to do early access anymore. Others, I'd be playing it.
So other than a new biome, do you know if they have any kind of new mechanics other than just having to deal with the cold, or?
They haven't talked too much about it, but I mean, with the original Subnautica, if you actually look at the game's description, they don't talk about a lot of stuff. I guess they sort of want to allow you to sort of get into the game and figure it out yourself. Like I said in the old show, it's sort of When I say figure out, you still go in, but there is like a little AI system which says, "Hey, you should do this," or "Hey, you should do that," or "Hey, you need to get this element in order to build this." Um, so I don't know too much more about the mechanics beyond what was said in the Steam description, what they said on their website. If you do Google unknown worlds, they have stuff there, but again, you're not going to be able to find out too much about what new stuff is introduced in the game until you actually pay for it in early access. Our early access is about 25 US dollars at the moment. And again, not too expensive, but the original Subnautica, I played it for 70 hours. This is supposed to be equivalent in terms of gameplay time.
So okay, so since it's an equivalent in terms of gameplay, is this standalone or do you have to buy the original as
It
well?
is standalone, so you do not need to buy the original, but like I said on the previous show, if you've never played Subnautica, definitely play the first one before playing this one. It'll make your life easier. But the developers have specifically said you don't need to play the original one. So until I actually play this, I won't know how they sort of bridge the gap between Subnautica veterans and people who are new to this kind of game.
So would you call this a DLC or a sequel?
Um, it's been, I mean, it's gotta have been about 2 years since the original, more than 2 years. I would definitely say, I wouldn't even say it's a sequel though, because they're still using the same engine. Graphically, it's gonna look the same. It's not too many new mechanics from what I've read. Again, I've not played it yet. I would say it's sort of, yeah, I would say it's leaning towards DLC a bit more.
Call it an expansion, like an
Yes,
MMO.
yes, an expansion rather than a sequel. Um,
Okay,
and I believe
interesting.
that's the language the developers have used as well.
Expansion. Okay.
Yes.
Well, nice. I'll have to. I've heard a lot of good things about Subnautica. I haven't played it yet, but maybe I'll have to add it to my ever-growing backlog.
Yes, and that is a
Oh,
time for us to sort of pitch. Oh, please watch our previous episodes. If you're just joining us today, you're watching a video for the first time. We have loads of interesting content that is only getting better. You know, better lighting, better audio quality, better cool overlays done by Adam Gray himself.
beautiful.
Well,
Not to toot
ladies
my own horn, but
and gentlemen, that is it for today's special episode. We might be doing this as a regular thing in the future, but we will keep you updated on the social media. As always, please feel free to contact us on Twitter at Gaming Aged. I still need to change that to Middle Age Gaming. Adam told me I can change it. Facebook at Middle
you
Age
can.
Gaming 2020. Instagram at Middle Age Gaming No 2020. I hope you enjoyed the show today, and it's so great to have people watching on YouTube and on other places. If you do like us, if you do want to ask us questions, please drop us anything you want to talk to us about. If you say, I hate you, please do it. At least we get to hear from you. Adam?
And if you prefer email, we do love emails, especially those long ones. So go ahead and drop us a line at middleagedgaming2020 at gmail.com. And we would love to start answering some listener emails on air. If you guys can give us some ideas on maybe topics you want to hear about or expansion on certain games, that sort of thing, we would absolutely love to include that. So don't forget, you can catch us streaming, either myself or Krian, during the week. So subscribe to our Twitch channel, Middle Aged Gaming. You can find us both here. And follow our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can subscribe to your own as well if you want, so you can be notified when we go live. So thank you, and we will see you on Tuesday.
Definitely. See you on Tuesday, episode 7. We are talking about completionists versus game hoppers. It's going to be an exciting show because you can see the completionist is right next to me. And again, I always point my hand in the wrong direction. And
I
I'm
know
the
it's
game
hard,
hopper
right?
because I have still to find that game that is catching me. I haven't gotten back to Shadowrun Dragonfall just yet, but who knows? Or maybe it'll be Dragon's Dogma.
Dragon something.
Dragon something, yes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, see you on Tuesday. Good night.